What are some NSFW history facts that don't get taught in school? There was a Greek general who was supposed to lead a major expedition to Sicily. The night before he left, he got wasted and walked around Athens with his other drunk friends and knocked all of the penises off of the statues in Athens. This caused him to be arrested. He missed the expedition and they lost almost all of the men they sent to Sicily because only he knew the plan well enough to pull it off. Powdered wigs were invented to cover up head sores caused by syphilis. Syphilis also eventually destroys your nose, which is why old Timmy writing frequently refers to how prominent a person's nose is while expounding on their moral character. Essentially, this guy is super great. He doesn't even have syphilis. Apostrophe. Alexander the Great had 361 concubines, official prostitutes. 4 more and he would have won for every day of the year. Not sure if he used the Egyptian calendar back then, but that one had exactly 360 days. So 1 for each day and an extra to swap in and spice things up. During the Age of Sail, anytime a large ship would come into port, the men often wouldn't be allowed shore leave for a few days. So you would see small boats packed with prostitutes heading out to the ship at mooring. Larger ships of the line would have over 500 men aboard, so there could definitely be a couple hundred ladies brought aboard, behind the captain's back. Comma, and with virtually no privacy aboard. You would have spaces in the ship with hundreds of couples going at it at once. There were definitely a lot of captains that didn't allow any women aboard. So the sailors on those ships would just have to wait until they could go ashore. If you look up Edward Russell in history books or even Wikipedia, you learn about his military service, including Admiral of the Royal Fleet for some famous battles. What they don't teach is that he threw a party so epic it's still being talked about 300 years later. In 1694, he threw a party for officers, and with 6,000 guests coming, wanted to make it special. So, he made the world's largest cocktail, drained the garden fountain and used that as a giant punch bowl with hundreds of gallons of liquor, over a half-ton of sugar, thousands of lemons, etc. He hired bartenders to paddle around in boats, scoop it up, and serve it to attendees. At some point, it began to rain, so they put a tent up over the fountain to prevent it getting watered down. About a week after they started, they had drank every last drop. The fountain was dry, and the party was over. Catherine the Great had a parlor room filled with explicit, erotic furniture she commissioned personally. We're talking BJS carved into chairs, an end table where giant DCKS torrential cumshots were holding up a marble countertop, a woman getting eaten out by a demon on a throne. Homegirl had taste. The first person who was sentenced to the electric chair died horribly. Someone forgot to wet an essential part of the machine and he ended up with bubbling skin, melting eyes and a foaming mouth, among other things. The amount of electricity was so strong that he began to convulse violently. So much so that he weakened straps. He twitched so erratically that his index finger dug through the palm of his hand. The entire room smelled of burning flesh, and the stench even permeated some clothes. Many people who came to see had fainted during the execution. But do you know what's even more horrible? They heard him wheezing after they turned the electricity off. Another fun fact about the electric chair. An emperor of Abyssinia, now Ethiopia, had heard about it being used as a method of execution in the West and decided to get one to execute prisoners. However, Abyssinia didn't have electricity. So instead he just used it as a throne and claimed he was so powerful, Western methods of execution couldn't hurt him. The German army was given methamphetamines during their invasion of France, Belgium, Netherlands in 1940. This was the other part of Blitzkrieg that isn't really talked about. For the first 3 days the German army advanced without rest. No stopping or sleeping for 3 days straight. If you got tired they just gave you more meth. Fatigue may have also played a role in why the Panzer divisions refused to stop even after being ordered to several times by high command. They only finally stopped advancing when Hitler personally ordered the halt. TLDR. An army of methed up Nazis took down the largest army in Europe in a few weeks. Edit. Netflix has a good documentary series on it now. Jenny Wade was a prostitute and a madam. She wasn't a kind and generous soul who was treating the wounded from both sides of the Battle of Gettysburg. She was offering her services to both sides. When you take the bus tour with recorded audio, the storyteller narrating the tour is supposed an old-timer reflecting on the battle. When you pass the Jenny Wade house, still standing, he says something like, "That's the Jenny Wade house. Jenny was a friend of mine. She was a friend to many. I always liked that subtle nod." In the 12th century, a philosopher named Peter Abelard challenged the church teaching on sexual morality, pointing out that no ceremony of man could make an inherently immoral act moral. The act would have to be already generally moral. Therefore, sex before marriage really couldn't be considered a mortal sin. He fell in love with the wrong woman and had his nuts cut off. This made him angry and sad. He then wrote a book. 1. The creator of the vibrator was George Taylor. It was originally made as a steam-powered device that was used to cure a disease called hysteria by massaging the pelvic region. 2. Empress Wu Zetian of China asserted her dominance over male officials by making them kneel before her and pleasure her orally. 3. For a long time, royal European women gave birth in front of spectators who would pour into the bedchambers to watch the babies arrive. 4. Plymouth colony of British North America, New England, convicted and hung a young man committing bestiality. It was one of the first hangings in the New World. The 16-year-old Thomas Granger was hanged to death for indulging in a buggery with a mare, a cow, 2 goats, many sheep, 2 calves, an ostrich, allegedly, and a turkey, as mentioned in the court report from 1642. His hangman was one John Holmes. 5. Nelson Rockefeller, former vice president of USA, suffered a heart attack and died while having sex with his 25-year-old assistant. He was 70. Napoleon would ask that his wife, Josephine, not bathe for several days when he knew he would be coming home. "My man's liked a stinky lady." On a lighter note, after she died, he kept a clipping from her flower garden in a locket on his person until the day he died. The point here is you go to both extremes if you really love someone. Ancient Greece society was all about butt sex. Gets glossed over or referred to in a passing and vague way. In fact, part of the curriculum of well-off kids, from fancy Athenians to tough Spartans, was being poked from behind by your teacher tutor. Child grooming was more or less systemic, a necessary step in life for most men. Not necessarily NSFW, but pirates were one of the first people to have a healthcare plan of sorts. If you lost an appendage, there was a predetermined pay for everything that was lost or maimed. Also, there was a pretty large number of female pirates. For a time when women had little to no value in the workplace, they more or less had equal treatment and pay to other pirates. The loss of a limb payment is depicted in the Errol Flynn movie, Captain Blood. The one-legged pirate receiving the GB Gold is played by my grandfather. His leg was machine gunned off on the 11th of November 1918. Moved the family to Hollywood and was an extra for many years. Homosexuals were not considered victims of the Holocaust, and after the war was over they were forced to finish their sentences because homosexuality was still illegal in Germany under paragraph 175. Meaning they were still at risk of being imprisoned and incinerated. Not generally talked or learned about in schools. In late imperial China, a concubine earmarked for sex by the emperor later at night would be pampered all day. When the night of the deed came, the palace servants stripped the girl naked, wrapped her in a silk blanket, and carried her to the emperor's bed to unwrap her there. This practice wasn't for imperial majesty's kinks. It was a security measure. Sometime earlier, a concubine tried to assassinate an emperor during sex with weapons hidden in her clothing. President Lyndon B. Johnson, as the name implies, was infamous for talking about his penis and boasting how big it was. There's a recording of Johnson arguing on the phone with pants manufacturers about how they failed to leave enough room for the crotch, and actively creating a detailed verbal picture of his presidential groin. When my high school history teacher asked the class what we knew about Johnson, my answer was not what he was looking for but was what I felt the class needed. Plato thought that the babies inherited everything from their parents and therefore from perfect parents having intercourse at the perfect moment would born perfect babies. Imagine an equilateral triangle with the parents in two of the corners and the baby in the third. He thought that these babies would be the superior race. Consequently, a political utopia would be originated from a genetic utopia.